Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Tuesday, August 1st. I'm your host, Tom Orr. Yes, it is August. That means it's almost camp season. Can't wait. Football season almost here. The Indiana game, 32 days away. The game against Michigan, just 116 days away. With camp coming up just a little later on this week, we got to wrap up some of our off-season content, and we got a lot of listener questions for the Buckeye Weekly podcast, and frankly, we just didn't have enough time to get to all of the good questions on there, so we're going to get to some of those good questions right here, and we're going to do that with our good buddy Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com, also the host of the Buckeye Weekly podcast. If you want to hear us answering more questions, well, we'll have a Buckeye Weekly show with a bunch more questions coming out as well, so you can find all of those on the Buckeye Weekly feed. Go ahead and subscribe to that. If you're watching this, well, let's get the housekeeping out of the way up front. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the thumbs up. If you're listening on a podcast platform, make sure you're subscribed to all of our podcasts. We're going to have a ton of content coming out this week, all this month, all this fall, all this football season, and then beyond. Lots of interesting stuff going on. So let's start with Tony. Let's start with a question from @Larry_Legend9. How much of an impact will CJ Hicks have this season? Is he the best linebacker we've had since Ryan Shazier? Can we hope/expect that he is the best player on the defense?
That's a lot to put on a sophomore who has yet to play on defense for the Buckeyes. I do think he's going to have a significant impact. I don't expect him to be the starter. I think that's still Steel Chambers, but I think Jim Knowles has gone into spring camp in the summer, and they'll go into fall camp looking for ways to use CJ Hicks. We know they've talked about putting him at the jack with Mitch Melton. So there'll be some of that. So I do think he's going to have an impact. I don't know what that is. Is it, 4.5 sacks and something like, 8 tackles for loss? I think that would be, I think they take that right now, but I do think he's going to be a playmaker. Tom, is he the best linebacker they've had since Ryan Shazier? I think Tommy Eichenberg is a second-team All-American last year, and I think Raekwon McMillan was a 2-time second-team All-American. It's just really early to say that of CJ Hicks. He's got all the potential you would ever want, but you gotta. I want to see it first.
Well, I feel like every time we talk about CJ Hicks, we also talk about Sonny Styles, and those are two guys who are both, from about an hour around Columbus, who are both 5-star guys, who both have tons of physical ability, who are both guys who the coaching staff knows. You are not the only one who has noticed that CJ Hicks has some really unique talents. The coaching staff knows. The coaching staff knows that about Sonny Styles. Last year, Sonny Styles had a role on this team towards the end of the season that reflected, hey, this is a guy who we really can't keep off the field. He was supposed to be in the middle of his senior season of high school, and he's there playing meaningful reps against Georgia in the Peach Bowl. The coaching staff knows. And the coaching staff knows that CJ Hicks has that kind of ability as well. There are 2 really good linebackers ahead of CJ Hicks. And I know, as at the old Urban Meyer line, how often have we said at the old Urban Meyer line, potential just means you haven't done it yet. And that's kind of where CJ Hicks is, and to a certain extent, Sonny Styles is, where, yeah, they have a ton of potential. You have seen a little bit of Sonny Styles on defense. You have literally not seen a snap of CJ Hicks on defense in a meaningful game. He obviously played in the spring game, but he didn't play a snap on defense last year. There's a lot of ability there. The coaches know there's a lot of ability there. The coaches want to get him on the field. They're going to find ways to get him on the field, much as they did with Sonny Styles last year, much as they're going to with Sonny Styles this year. But that may involve a little bit of out-of-the-box thinking for both of those guys, where it's not just Sonny Styles is going to be the nickel corner for Ohio State. He may play in a couple different spots. They may use him in certain packages. He may be a linebacker at times. CJ Hicks is going to be probably, it sounds like, the jack, along with Mitchell Melton, as you mentioned. So that's a little bit of a tweener position, a spot where, are you a linebacker, are you a defensive end? And it's like, yeah, kind of, both, a little bit. But yeah, I think you're going to see a bunch of those guys. I'm sure that no matter how much those guys play, it will not be enough for people who have an idea what they think these guys could be and what these guys probably will be. But there's a lot of other talented guys on this team. This is not Antoine Randall at Indiana, where everything has to run through Antoine Randall because he's the only good player on the team. These are guys who have a lot of talented teammates around them. A lot of guys, if you have a second-team All-American like Tommy Eichenberg, if you have a multi-year starter like Steel Chambers, who has played a couple of years now at linebacker and who has done a really good job. He has been a very good, impactful player there as well. Plus, you get Cody Simon in the mix there. I mean, there's a lot of talented guys there. They will find a role for both of those guys, but it's not necessarily going to be 60 snaps, 80 snaps a game.
Yeah, and I think there will be games where CJ Hicks, the last question there is, can we expect that he is the best player on defense? I think there will be games or maybe quarters where he looks like he is because he makes some plays in a row. And you go back to Steel Chambers, I guess would have been, 2021 when he took over from Taraji Mitchell. He's making more plays. They put him there and he just starts making plays, and eventually he takes over for Taraji Mitchell. Like, they're not going to keep somebody out who can make plays. If he's making plays, they're going to get him on the field more and more. So he'll have an opportunity, and I do think he will make some plays, but I also think Steel Chambers has played well enough to where, he's played better than Taraji Mitchell did in the same instance. So it's going to be harder to unseat him, but I think there will be you don't need to unseat him. Just bring in another seat and figure it out that way.
All right. Speaking of unseating people, let's go to one from @Nanduri NFL. Who finishes the season as wide receiver 3, and how close do they get to unseating the wide receiver 2 in Emeka Egbuka? I say this because the talent in that room is so ridiculous, it's almost hard to fathom.
Yeah, I think this one is pretty clear. It's Julian Fleming. He was the number 3 guy last year, and he missed the first 2 games of the season, but he played after that. He returns and catches 6 touchdown passes in his first 5 games. Still wasn't quite healthy the entire time, but all things seem pretty good with him. So I see a pretty clear delineation with Harrison and Egbuka, who I wrote about them on Monday about possibly being the best wide receiver duo in Ohio State history, and Ryan Day, of course, said, "I don't think you can say there's anybody better." But, they need to do it again for them to be the best. And I'm expecting more from Julian Fleming this year. Last year was like 34 catches for 500 yards and those 6 touchdowns. He didn't catch anything the second half of the season when he was second half of his season. But I would expect 40 some catches, and can he get to 600-700 yards? It also depends on how much they're running and how good the quarterback play is, but I expect him to be a viable problem for Big Ten defenses. And if he's the guy that you're focused the least on in terms of receivers as a defense, that's a dangerous position to be in.
You've seen him hit some big plays. He had the big one against Iowa last year where there was pretty decent coverage, but it was only one guy on him, and he hit the big, 75-yarder or whatever it was. If you've got safeties over Harrison and Egbuka, and he's one-on-one, you can see some big plays from him. The question with Julian Fleming, of course, is always, is he healthy? And if he's healthy, I think there's a pretty good chance he finishes the season as wide receiver 3. I don't know that I expect him to. I mean, in terms of unseating wide receiver 2 in Emeka Egbuka, are we talking about production? Are we talking about where they get drafted in the NFL? I think I would bet on Harrison and Egbuka being 1-2 coming out of this season in terms of NFL draft, probably in terms of production as well. But if Julian Fleming is healthy, we haven't seen that. So it'd be interesting to actually get a chance to see a healthy Julian Fleming. He was the number 1 wide receiver in his class, of course, coming out of high school. He's just has not been able to stay healthy and on the field for a full season. I'd be really intrigued to see what that looks like. And then as far as, I think that's the sort of status quo answer. The other 3 guys that I think I would throw in here are Xavier Johnson and Jaden Ballard and Carnell Tate. And I think, Xavier Johnson is going to be a weapon for this team, but he's a little bit of a Swiss Army knife kind of guy. I don't know that he's going to be, he's not going to be someone who I would expect to have 800 yards receiving or anything like that. Jaden Ballard, the talent is there. We just haven't seen it. If Fleming goes down, he's probably the most logical guy to replace him. So then maybe he becomes that wide receiver 3 if Fleming is not the answer there. And then Carnell Tate, true freshman, looked incredible this spring. Obviously had the tragedy involving his mom this summer, and we'll see, how has that impacted him, mentally in terms of preparation. Has that kind of taken him out for a little while? All of that would be very understandable. We don't know yet. And then, as far as he goes, what does a true freshman season look like? David Boston was not starting game 1. David Boston was an impact player and making plays in the Rose Bowl at the end of the year, not game one. Chris Olave, same thing. Garrett Wilson, same thing. You generally do not walk onto the field day one. And those guys, the other wide receivers on campus, when those guys were true freshmen, no offense to any of the other guys on those teams, those guys were not these guys. So it is going to be harder to get on the field, even if Carnell Tate is better than all of those guys, and that would be a very big ask. It is still going to be harder for him to get on the field because you've got all these other guys in that room. So I think with this question, much like the last one, I think the answer is you're going to see these guys, but you need to be a little bit patient, especially with the younger ones, because there's a lot of other talent out there, and they will work them in. And believe me, if they are ready to play, they are not in the mindset to hold these guys out just to keep the production down, to keep their arbitration award down or whatever, like a baseball team would. They want to get these. If these guys are ready to contribute and ready to make an impact on a team that could potentially be a championship team, they're going to be out there. So we'll see where those two guys go. Last one, Tony, from @VW Chad W. Do you think Notre Dame could be a problem, or do you think a lot of the kinks will be worked out by the time Ohio State gets there?
I think the answer is yes to both of those. I don't think it's an either or. I think that going on the road to Notre Dame is going to be a problem. It's an issue. It's there's history there. You know that, and so it's kind of built in when you're going there and dealing with it, preparing for it, and being excited about it. The emotions of being there will impact you. The crowd will impact you. The defense will impact you, and we'll see how Sam Hartman, the quarterback, is with the offense. But I also think there will be a lot of kinks worked out by then for Ohio State, but also for Notre Dame. So this isn't a thing where, last year we saw Ohio State struggle. We saw Notre Dame struggle. It's a season opener that happens, and there was kind of the battle of wills. This is going to be a battle of skills and game planning, because coaches are going to have a much better idea of who they have, what they have, and how they can utilize all of it. So I do think I can't wait. I think it's going to be a tough game, but also it's much better for Ohio State to be playing this game 4, in my opinion, than game 1.
Absolutely. And that gives the offensive line a little bit of time to hopefully gel for the Buckeyes and give the starting quarterback, whether it's Kyle McCord or Devin Brown, a chance to kind of get set in the offense and get more reps and get accustomed to all that. But this is also the first road game. The first true road game, because it's Indiana, but we've all been to Indiana when Ohio State goes there. So it will be a much more hostile atmosphere for Notre Dame than it was in Bloomington. But it does feel like if something is going to go bad for Ohio State, it is getting beaten in the trenches, especially on the offensive line. Ohio State should have the skill talent advantage over Notre Dame. Sam Hartman is a fantastic quarterback. Sam Hartman may be a better quarterback than whoever Ohio State's trotting out, at that moment in week 4. But on the whole, if you're going to have a concern, the concern I think would be, how is the offensive line holding up in its first truly hostile atmosphere at Notre Dame that week? Other than that, is there a legitimate concern in your mind? I mean, something that really jumps out to you as, boy, this could be a problem?
I think Ohio State has everything they need. And by that point, like you said, they have enough options on the offensive line to get it fixed. And also, if they can't get it fixed, they'll know what the issues are and to steer the offense away from those, like turn into the slide, if you will, or in football parlance, away from it. But they'll know where their weaknesses are, and they'll know where their strengths are, so you can focus on that. So I think they've got everything they need. What they don't have necessarily is the experience at quarterback to deal with this environment. But I also think this is something that will forge their starter, and this is something that could, like in the 2012 season when the tough games would just spit out a better team, a tougher team. This is something that's going to harden them moving forward, and it could really bring out who the absolute true leaders are of this team.
Well, that game is still about a month and a half away. The start of the season about a month away. The start of fall camp just a couple days away. So it is a very busy and very exciting time to be a member of BuckeyeHuddle.com. We'll have coverage of this week, Ryan Day's interview on Wednesday. We'll have coverage of the first practice on Thursday. We'll be at practice a little later on this month. Plenty of interviews throughout the month. Lots of coverage of the team. There's a bunch of recruiting news coming this week as well. So, and later this month. So it would be a great time to hop on board at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Alex and Mark absolutely killing it on the recruiting beat. Tons of coverage, tons of insight and analysis, great insider content from them. Tony, Kevin, and I covering the team. Ross and Alex and Devin and Mikey all covering the X's and O's, making you a smarter football fan, plus a fantastic, fun community. Lots of football chatter, lots of other stuff to talk about, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. So if you're thinking about becoming a member, give it a try. Sign up today. There's going to be a lot of stuff to talk about this month, and then as we head into the football season. So that will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.